Hello. Welcome to What We Eat in a Warming World. I'm Juliet Litman. I'm delighted to be here to kick off this two-part session. We're going to start with Lisa Dyson and Greg Constantine, a bit about them, and then we'll get into our conversation. And if I leave anything out, please jump in. Lisa is founder and CEO of Air Protein, which is a company that is reinventing food production to sustainably feed the world through a process that makes meat from elements of the air. She's the mission-driven entrepreneur, and before this protein-focused work, she was already working to turn carbon dioxide and carbon-rich waste like wood and agricultural residue into sustainable products for commercial applications. I have so many questions on that, so we'll get to it in a second. Lisa also previously was a management consultant at BCG. She conducted research in bioengineering, physics, and energy at several universities. You've delivered several TED Talks and appeared on PBS's Nova. You have a PhD. You've been named to Inc. magazine's 2019 Top 100 Female Founders list and received the 2018 Women in Natural Sciences Award. It's incredibly impressive, and I'm very intimidated.
Me too.
Greg is the co-founder and CEO of Air Company. Just to be clear, no relation, right?
No relation.
Greg leads business strategy, marketing, and design of its carbon conversion technology to transform carbon dioxide into products. With Greg's leadership, Air Company has brought to market the first of their kind products, including Air Vodka, Air Spray hand sanitizer, and Air Eau de Parfum. He has spearheaded partnerships with NASA, which I'm also really excited to talk about, and to utilize Air Company's technology in outer space. He was named to Forbes' 2017 30 Under 30 list for marketing, and his firm made Fast Company's 20 Most Innovative Companies list. I mean, those are basically all the accolades I think that are available in the world. So let's begin with what each of your companies do day to day, because I think there's two elements here that I really want to dig into. One is the actual science that I probably will be asking very specific questions about because I don't completely understand, but really want to, and I think that also the business scalability aspect. So Lisa, do you want to start with what Air Protein is doing on a day-to-day basis and the mission that you're pursuing right now?
Yes, absolutely, and wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having me here. And we are converting elements of the air into protein. It's based on work done by NASA during the space program in the 60s and 70s, where they were looking at how to feed astronauts on long space journeys. And one of their ideas had to do with using elements of the air as a core input. And we're taking that protein, which is really rich in nutrients, all the essential amino acids, rich in vitamins and minerals, including vitamin B12, which is lacking in a vegan diet. We take that, we apply culinary techniques, and we make air-based meat. So replacements for chicken, replacements for pork, beef, scallops, and beyond.
The scallops piece is really interesting to me. I have more questions about that later, but I was doing some research beforehand to really understand, and I read that the process is sort of similar to yogurt, and I was curious what that means. Like, what does it mean to make something from air that is similar to what we could understand as being, like what we had for breakfast, basically?
Absolutely, and I learned how to make yogurt from my husband's Turkish mother. And so you start off with cultures, and then you add milk, and essentially those cultures consume that milk, and they grow, and you end up with a pot full of yogurt or a tank full of yogurt, as it were. And with our process, we also start off with cultures very similar to those probiotic yogurt cultures, and instead of using milk, we use elements of the air as the inputs that the cultures then feed off of, and then grow and create a nutritious protein ingredient. And even when you make yogurt, you actually end up with whey as a byproduct, which actually is a good protein source as well.
Oh, okay, interesting. I'm going to have to look at some diagrams of this later, but it's so fascinating to me. One thing you both have mentioned is the NASA piece of this. How did you come across the work that NASA had done? And then, Greg, I'm curious how you began working with them.
Yeah, I think for us, we started off, so I started a company called Kiverdi first, and it was just more looking at carbon dioxide, which we have an abundance of, and how to use that as a resource. And that was, we're a carbon-based life form. We get our carbon through our food. We need our food, we need food in order to survive, and that's where we get our carbon from. And so asking the question of how do you feed astronauts or how do you feed people is the same thing as how do you create, how do you recycle carbon, essentially. And so we found this technology, and we just began working on it at Kiverdi for different applications. And ultimately, because the food industry is such a large greenhouse gas emitter, and in fact, it emits more greenhouse gases than our entire transportation sector, the full industrial agricultural sector. And so, we really wanted to have an impact. And protein is the biggest culprit, as it were. And so we wanted to figure out ways to replace protein.
How did you decide to pick this up again? I mean, obviously, I think you said it was abandoned in the 60s or 70s. Why did you decide that this seemed like something to re-engage with?
I think for us, it was just more the mission and the need. Right now, our current technology to make a steak takes 2 years, and it has the greenhouse gas footprint of a car. My husband loves his steak. Sorry to call you out there, Engen. And so our mission is to make more delicious ways of making that something that's similar to that steak. So to give you the same experiences, we know that some people are going to just not eat meat, maybe flexitarians, vegetarians, but then the broad, population out there, they're going to enjoy their steaks. And so how do we create something that gives you that same experience, but has a lower greenhouse gas footprint? That was really the mission and the reason why we picked it up.
Got it. And Greg, what does your company do on a day-to-day basis? I mean, I assume it's somewhat complementary to what Lisa's doing, but I'm curious, what's different and what your mission is more focused on.
Yeah, there's definitely similarities. The core of our business is really centered around taking carbon dioxide, as Lisa mentioned, and turning it into carbon-negative alcohols and fuels. So, our business is really focused on accelerating the transition to sustainable production methods of those alcohols, and we applicate them to a number of different industries, and they can also act as intermediaries to other types of products as well.
Gotcha. And so how did you land on working on vodka?
Yeah, we said, how can we make an application when you're working on innovative technology like this, as Lisa knows, it's cost prohibitive in the short term, right? And it's really around how can you try to come down that cost curve over time, and so vodka products and perfume products and sanitization products are really just a byproduct of our research and development that we monetize on a pathway towards scale, because when the volumes of the product that you're producing are relatively low, you can go into some industries like this where the value of the product is really, really high, on a pathway towards these really large industrial applications where the volumes are massive, and that's where you can really have the most amount of impact from a carbon utilization point of view. So we said, rather than just spending, years and decades and potentially longer trying to get towards this end goal, why don't we try to build a viable business along the way, because it's that commercial viability that really allows you to flourish at scale as well.
Interesting. And so then, how did you get from vodka to jet fuel? Or I think it's jet fuel. Did I make that up?
Yeah. So what comes out, our technology is really, taking carbon dioxide and hydrogen that we make ourselves via a process called electrolysis, all run on renewable power. And when we combine those two things inside our reactors, the reaction that's caused creates a mixture of alcohols and water. And those alcohols are ethanol and methanol and paraffins and a number of others, and water. And so what we do is we go and we separate out those alcohols and we applicate them to those industries. So the technology is the same across it all. It's just a variety of sectors that can be touched on within there. And the beverage industry is obviously ethanol based from a spirits perspective, as is the perfume industry. And then when you're talking about things like like methanol, which kind of spearheaded our work with NASA, converting that into things like sugars and other items, really helped kind of be the basis for what we do.
NASA's obviously a huge organization. I feel like I'm talking about it there's 3 people at NASA. It's obviously huge. Was there an acknowledgement that what you are, I assume, selling to them is based on their own research essentially, or is tied to the work they were doing back in the 60s before landing on the moon? Yeah,
I think that all of the work that we all do is always based on the work of other people. Not always, but most of the time, right? We're standing on the shoulders of those before us. So, there's a ton of great examples where applications for space then became applicable here on Earth. Solar panels is a great one, right? So I think the ability to work with government bodies like NASA really allows you to do the R&D work when cost isn't necessarily the most gating factor, where if you were to go and create something for a private customer here on Earth, it's all about just making it cost effective, where applications that even that Lisa was working on for outer space, while there is a major factor in there, allow that R&D a bit more flexibility.
That's interesting. So did you start your company thinking you'd be consumer focused, or thinking you would be working with the government?
The goal was to always have the most amount of impact that we can, and that's really working in these really large TAM markets. And we just said that consumer products are going to be a vehicle or a reason for people to believe in the company. A reason where if you walk into a restaurant and you can buy a product that's made from carbon dioxide, that allows everyday folks to kind of really maybe get a touch point on what technology has the ability to do and how we can use technology to help better the planet and kind of continually move humanity forward.
Interesting. Before we dig into everything you guys just said, which is so fascinating, can you explain to me the difference between carbon neutral, carbon negative, and carbon recycling? Because I think as it relates to food, it's helpful to understand the differences between all those processes.
Okay, Lisa, go for it.
Yeah, okay, well, I'll start. Well, our process, when you produce something, often greenhouse gases are emitted, carbon may be emitted, and so that's just a carbon positive. Even though it's a good sounding word, it's actually excess carbon that is part of the problem, part of the whole climate change problem. And if you're carbon negative, then our process from cradle to gate actually is a consumer of carbon dioxide. We use beverage grade carbon dioxide, the same that you have in your sparkling water or your sodas. And so that's carbon negative. Carbon neutral just simply means that you're net zero.
Got it. So you guys are buying SodaStream in bulk, I'm assuming, to get your carbon dioxide?
Yeah, essentially you can actually see, when you do fermentation, CO2 is actually a byproduct of traditional fermentation when you make yogurt or wine or cheese. And so you can just take the CO2 from that, and that's what typically goes into the beverage industry.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful. And is there hesitation when you explain this to people, about where the CO2 is coming from? Is that a question people want to know about, or is it just sort of like a given in the work that you're doing that this is, a positive way of moving forward?
I don't think anything about our technology is a given. So yeah, I think that's definitely a question people ask. And yeah, so that's where we start. And then there's carbon capture technologies are becoming more and more, or they will be in the future become available. People are working on them. A lot of innovators that are doing a lot of good work on that. And so that's something where you're capturing it directly from the air. That's something that will become available to all of these types of technologies in the future.
Got it. Okay, so let's get back to the scallops. You mentioned we were talking yesterday, and I was very excited to hear about that. And more broadly, I'm really excited to understand how you both approach product development. And so for Air Protein, how did you decide on what proteins you wanted to make?
For us, we really wanted to attack not just the food industry, but the protein sector and the meat industry being kind of the largest kind of sector to contribute in the food industry. And so we're really focused on, we start off with chicken. And so making an air-based chicken was our first target. And the reason was because a lot of people are shifting from pork and beef to chicken for health reasons. And so as a lot of plant-based and alternative meat companies emerge, a lot of them are focused on beef and ground products. And at the time, people weren't looking at chicken. And so we wanted to demonstrate that not only could we deliver the taste that people are looking for, the textures, the sustainability, but also nutrition. And so nutrition is one of our pillars as we build our company and target products that are really nutritional. And so seafood would be another kind of area where we're targeting things like scallops, and we have an air halibut that we're working on as well. To make really nutritious products that are tasty and sustainable.
How important is it that you think it emulate the original product? Is the goal to create something that is a substitute, or just to introduce a new way of eating, or both?
It's an interesting question, and it depends on who you're talking to, and different people are interested in different things. We are focused on replicating that flavor first, because there's a huge market out there where if they just had something that tasted as good, they would transition over. And so that's really what we're targeting first. But we have this protein ingredient that has great functional properties, oil holding capacity, water holding capacity. These are the types of things that are important when you're applying culinary techniques to create different product formulations. So we have that flexibility to create new things that people haven't seen before.
Interesting. And what about for you? Do you want your vodka to taste like Grey Goose or something, or do you want it to have its own flavor? I guess you know what my favorite vodka is now. So.
Yeah. No. So the beauty about the ethanol that we create is that it is really easily purifiable. So from a consumption perspective, it's far better from a taste profile. When you're traditionally drinking a vodka, it's relatively hard to drink, right? It burns a lot. But when there's a lack of impurities in there because of how easily purifiable the liquid is, it becomes, I'm obviously biased, but it becomes much easier to drink as well. But for us, it was really around, how can we go into archaic industries and and really innovate in them as well, right? Beverage industry, being one of them, but there is also that product benefit as well. So when you can offer a solution from an impact point of view, a solution from a quality point of view, and then going into these kind of industries that have been built upon heritage, that coming with technology like this, it's a great way to kind of start educating people about the ability for it.
What makes the alcohol industry or the beverage industry particularly archaic, and how do you identify other opportunities in sports? It would be like, how do you play Moneyball for food?
Well, if you think about the traditional ways, that ethanol is made, right? It's corn farming, grain, potato, any type of grain in that respect. So, the amount of land that you need, the amount of irrigation that you need, and I think all of those things add up over the course of centuries. So when you're coming in with a technology like this that really just runs on renewable power, carbon dioxide, that's a massive shift. That's a massive shift to an industry like that. So there's a long road ahead for sure, and for it to really be viable at scale is a long road ahead, and that's why we focus on products and product innovation, because it allows you to show that kind of like commercial viability for things like this in the future.
Do you think you'll continue to use alcohol as the base for what you're doing, similar to how Lisa's using the protein for what she's doing?
Yeah, I would say that we're always innovating. So there's hopefully there's always new applications as well. But the alcohols that we use, being the ethanols of the world, are really the basis for the building block of what else is to come from there.
And Lisa, you mentioned that there's a market already of people who are interested in meat substitutes. I like an Impossible Burger when I see it on the menu and at home. What have you learned from the Beyond Burgers and the Impossible Burgers and how those have hit the market?
Well, as you said, we stand on the shoulders of giants, of course. So those that came before us, they've introduced consumers to this concept that you can create something that tastes like meat, but that is from a different source. And so, I'm a vegetarian, so I like my veggie burgers, but a lot of people really want that same texture and that same mouthfeel. So I think that's really been a benefit of having those guys come before us.
And those products, I think, put a pretty big value on aesthetics. And I remember when I was first learning about Impossible Burger and how they wanted to emulate the look of meat being cooked and everything. Is that something that also factors into the tweaks that you're making, not just to the scallops, but to everything else? Or is it really more focused on taste?
Definitely focused on taste. And as we enter market, we're entering in food service and restaurants. And so it's really that delivery of that final product that's paired with other foods and other ingredients as well as we work with chefs.
Gotcha. And sort of just taking a bigger view, how do you get a Burger King to adopt air protein? How are you, what is the long road for, which you both referred to, for getting wide scale adoption to make a real difference in climate change?
Yeah, well, there's a number of factors. Definitely if you're talking about food, in the end, the taste has to be great, and it has to bring them customers. So if you're gonna work with a large food chain, essentially it has to be something that consumers are gonna buy. Some of the alternative meats out there, they do have a price premium in some cases, and so that's something they're looking for. There's a lot of companies out there that are making commitments for net zero, and they have no idea how to get there. And so we offer a solution, our process being carbon negative from cradle to gate. We offer a solution that allows them to actually achieve those goals. And
what about for you?
Yeah, you got to show that there's a market for it, right? You have to show that market fit, and I think I've probably touched on it a little bit, but you also want to be able to at least demonstrate that there is commercial viability from a cost perspective, because otherwise they'll just remain niche technologies that don't really get that lift off that you want and create that impact that you want. So proving out the market and then showing that there's real viability at scale is kind of like the next step after the innovation has been done.
Gotcha. And what are some of the biggest structural challenges to scale right now, and also to widespread adoption? I mean, for me, I often think about, I think there's more consciousness for just the average consumer of do you really want to use that straw, or do you really want to use just general ways that you can be helping with climate change? What do you think are the real barriers that are in place, and how do we overcome them?
Great question. There's definitely a few. I'll speak kind of maybe just on behalf of our organization, I would say first, but having demonstrated that the market's there and the market wants it, we really have kind of like a significantly higher demand than there is supply. So for us, we're really just focused on how do we make more and how do we decrease our cost to produce, and that's kind of like everything that we work on now. Having proven out the innovation, I would say that market trends. Since we started the company, obviously Lisa's been working in the industry for more than I have just shifted so drastically in a positive way. The way that how receptive people are to products like this, to technologies like this. We started the company just over 5 years ago, and the conversation just over 5 years ago to now has been drastically shifted for the good. So as we see other market trends going that way, we're seeing legislation change, and we're seeing a consumer demand. And so when you're getting it kind of from consumers and from legislation as well, big business will hopefully come along and change that pathway as well. But we need more technologies like ours out there in the marketplace as well.
So do you feel like part of the scale challenge is just like other companies doing the same thing, or more related to your ability to grow at the pace at which you're being asked to?
Yeah, all of the above, for sure. It takes entrepreneurs and innovators to go out and innovate and do the hard work and take the risk, where big corporations are not necessarily known for innovation, right? They're known for working with innovation or taking innovation and scaling it. So it's really both and more.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What about for Air Protein? Like, how do you continue to grow, and where do you see what's like the tipping point in this becoming a widely adopted way of eating?
Yeah, I think that the good thing that is happening is a shift in interest from consumers, which leads to interest from brands and other companies out there. And so that's what's going to cause these types of technologies, these types of companies, these innovations to become more popular. But it's just the capital and the time that it takes to build plants, essentially build production facilities. Like that's a key, kind of thing that we have to go through with all the companies that are out there that are scaling up innovation. So we're creating new supply chains that are based on different raw materials. You sort of decouple from, in our case, agricultural inputs. Same with Air Company. So these are new supply chains that we have to develop, and so that just takes a lot of time, investment, and so that's what the industry is facing.
And specifically with Air Protein, I was asking you a little bit about this yesterday. Like, who are the people in your company that are looking into making those changes, and like how you push the products forward? It's for me, I think I've referred to like so many extremely mundane things in my life to help try to understand all this. But I'm sort of curious, like, who are the people at Air Protein that are thinking about what needs to be done to make it tastier, and how do you do that, and like what does that work look like? Because I think it's so abstract if you don't really understand science, like I don't. So
yeah, just food scientists. That's what they're called, and that's who we have. We have food scientists that are working, and we have partners as well that we work with. We work, we don't have a not invented here syndrome. We work with others to leverage different technologies that are out there, and so people that are able to take the different ingredients, and we're focused on clean label, really nutritious products, and combine them to make great tasting food.
And for Air Company, how do you identify where you need to tweak your products, and like what's that R&D like as well? Sounds like it might be different since your vodka's on the market.
Yeah, it depends on the product for sure, but a product like vodka or any beverage spirits product is heavily regulated by the government, right? You got to work with the Alcohol, Tobacco and Trade Bureau. We have to work with the FDA. So there's a very strict kind of set of standards that you have to meet, as with food as well. And then there's the subjective nature of any consumer-based product, right? How do you want it to taste? How do you want it to feel? How do you want it to smell? And beyond. So you can do all the market testing you want, but at the end of the day, it really comes down to the decisions that you make as a company as well. Were you making hand sanitizer before COVID? We were not, no, absolutely not. No, that definitely speeded up the hand sanitizer. Yeah, we shut down vodka production and shifted into sanitizer production that we donated all of our product to throughout New York during that time. I think we've donated about 40 or 50,000 bottles of sanitizer since. Was there any impact on Air Protein business as a result of COVID?
We are scaling up production, so for us it was mainly the supply chain to get all the different pieces of, to build our air farms, or we call them. So that definitely affected us.
How big is an air farm?
So you can think about it like a brewery, or like a yogurt production facility. So that's essentially what they'll look like. And so you can deploy them anywhere They run day or night, rain or shine, any geography, any climate.
Amazing. So it's not, you don't need like a certain type of field, obviously. It doesn't need, and there's no like arability questions and whatnot.
Exactly, no arable land required.
Right.
Yeah.
And Greg, you also mentioned solar energy and how solar panels factor into the work that Air Company is doing. What is that impact, and how did you start using solar energy?
Yeah, so currently, because of our facilities are in Brooklyn, New York, we work with a partner that provides a mixture of wind and solar. You know, if we were to put solar on our building, it wouldn't even turn the lights on to how much kind of energy we use. The next facility we're going to be building is going to be up near Niagara, where we get access to hydropower essentially as well. But you know, with technologies like ours, you know, energy is a gating factor to cost. It's our, you know, it's our biggest expense at the end of the day. So you know, the influx of kind of you know, energy, no pun intended, going into that space to try to, you know, increase the amount of, you know, renewable power across the globe, and we need to see more of it as well. We need to see it coming down that cost curve as well.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I want to open it up to some questions. Are there any? Yeah, I think we have some mics. Do you want to right here?
I'm curious for both of you what your education background was, and what, I mean, they're, to me, Air chicken or Air vodka, Air protein. What spurred you with these ideas? What got you started and made you decide this can actually work?
Go for it.
As Juliet announced earlier, my educational background is nowhere near as kind of sophisticated as Lisa's, so I don't have a PhD, but I did my education in Sydney and studied a law background, and then did some kind of schooling over in Boston in the US as well, whilst I was working full time. But what spurred it was, for me specifically, I was working at a really large alcohol company at the time, and coming from Australia, which is an island, and then moving to New York, which is another island, but, you know, very different in their environmental, you know, aspects. I just became so acutely aware to my surroundings, to my environment, having left Australia. And then spending time working at, you know, in this big beverage alcohol industry, I really saw how detrimental, you know, we've been over the course of the last, you know, tens of decades to the planet. And I met my business partner, who's our CTO, who does have his PhD in, you know, in physics and chemistry, and we just decided to come together to try to create a company that was built upon the principles of how can we help the planet, and how can we utilize our skill sets, being technology and product development and the rest, to try to commercialize some products. And we never anticipated it kind of, you know, getting to where it is. I think we always just assumed that this stuff's really, really tough and will probably fail because everyone told us we'll fail. But we've had a moderate level of success, and it's really good to see the reaction to it.
I guess for me, my dad was an entrepreneur, so I saw the highs and lows of entrepreneurship and building businesses growing up. I was a part of his marketing team, as it were, helping him get business. But loved science, and so my PhD's in physics. My thesis is on rotating black holes, cosmology, and time travel. So very different than what I'm doing now. Ultimately, it was when I went to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina hit that I, you know, after, you know, try to help rebuild the city like many people that went there. Later, just thinking about that devastation that this weather event could cause, and knowing that climate scientists tell us we're going to have more weather events, they're going to be more frequent, more intense, you know, droughts, everything living in California, fires and all that. And so I just wanted to be a part of the solution. And my background, science and technology as well as business, I was at the Boston Consulting Group at some point, is what led me and the co-founder, Dr. John Reed, who also, you know, has a degree in science, several degrees in science, to just start a company and follow it up with Air Protein to try to have an impact.
Yes, thank you. It's really unique what you're doing, and any kind of creativity such as this to need government approvals, such as the FDA. What do you have to go through in this country? Because usually when you have government, they take a long time, they ask questions sometimes that are not relevant, and how do you do all your testing with them?
Well, I'll start. We go through the FDA process because it's a new ingredient that we're introducing into the marketplace. And so we've done a number of studies that for the, you know, to meet the requirements and to ensure and demonstrate that we have a really nutritious ingredient. And so, you know, happily we've gone through those different studies and are going through the process now, submitting, you know, manuscripts and independent review board. There's a lot of different details around that, but, you know, we're checking all the boxes.
Yeah. It's painful.
How long is the process of submission to approval?
I think it depends on the product, the industry, and the rest. You know, for us, it took a long time. Took a damn long time, and then kind of, you know, to your point, sir, you know, there may be the wrong questions asked, and it may take longer than you anticipate or want. But when you do get over that kind of hurdle, I think it's kind of pretty gratifying because you have brought it to a new product to market that has never existed, you know, previously. But it's definitely a challenge.
Go ahead.
I hope this isn't a dumb question, but how do you capture the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to farm? And also, how would we find your products on the open market?
I just want to say there's no dumb questions here, and if there were any, I certainly asked them, so thank you.
No dumb questions at all. I think we probably, you know, do it in a similar way, but we're agnostic on the source of CO2 that we use, but for the purpose of this, you know, we work with partners that essentially capture the emissions before they're emitted into the atmosphere from traditional ethanol production, so traditional corn farming at the end of the day. Yeah, and similar to Lisa, that's, you know, how you can get, you know, just traditional beverage grade CO2 that might come in a Coca-Cola or a Pepsi or a Mountain Dew as well.
Anybody else? Right here?
Yes, without being too, just wanted to ask you again, let's take chicken or beef, and just exactly how do you go about that and find the market, and then convince people to take a dive and do what you're talking about? And then are they asking about calories? What are they, what's the key marketability to say, yes, we're going to go ahead and we really like what you're doing?
Maybe I can ask you. We'll talk afterwards.
Okay, no, oh no, that's perfect, yeah.
Yeah, but for us, it's you know, first and foremost is taste. So working on the formulation to get that texture just right so that, you know, when you have it in your mouth, you have that right mouth feel and the flavors, you know, that you're used to. So that's number one. And I think beyond that, you know, it's you know, talking about things like the nutritional value, no hormones, no antibiotics, no pesticides, no herbicides, like all the, you know, we talk about kind of the benefits of what we're doing and what we're making, the nutritional value of the protein, complete protein, and all those different types of things. So depending on who you're talking to, some people are interested in various aspects of it, but bottom line, it just has to taste great.
Another challenge would be, let's assume you're Procter & Gamble or Kraft or any of these huge food companies. How do they try to put you out of business? Or in other words, how do you go about it? Because you're stepping into their field.
So I'm happy to see that more and more of these companies are very interested in, you know, cleaner, greener, you know, healthier alternatives, and they're partnering with startups and innovators. They're, you know, they're either partnering for ingredients or partnering to, you know, white label kind of approach, or partnering, you know, with the supply chain. And so we have, you know, supply chain partners that we partner with as we're commercializing. So I'm seeing more interest. It's actually positive. And part of the reason why there's not only interest, but the partnerships are being catalyzed is because it's the startups that have the innovation. It's the startups that are doing something very different, you know, thinking outside the box, and in our case, outside the world, essentially looking at NASA research. And these kind of new things are things that aren't in these large corporations, and so they're looking to bring innovation in.
We have one more question over here.
How are each of you looking at other elements of the product's life cycle beyond the base product itself, things like the packaging and the distribution? And I know, Lisa, you mentioned, you kind of emphasized cradle to gate, but use phase, recycling, composting, disposing, end of life.
Yeah, all those things will be things that we tackle over time. We're starting off with cradle to gate, you know, carbon negative, and being very sustainable with our packaging. And, you know, as we develop different partnerships, work with different companies, different restaurants, different retailers, then, you know, we're you know, our mission, our number one value in the company is to protect people and the planet. And so, you know, with each new partnership, we'll just make sure that we're doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Packaging is, a massive area that we actually have a whole team that spends a ton of time focusing on, even though it's away from our core business, which is making the alcohols. And to touch on the distribution piece, which 65% of the emissions of a beverage going out comes from the transportation of it. So the way that we've actually designed our technology so that it can be modular, so that we can deploy around cities around the country and around the world as well, rather than relying on big, enormous plants in one area and then distributing out from there. Let's actually make hyper-localized distribution as well to help displace some of the emissions that come from transportation.
All right, well, thank you both so much. This is really fascinating. I certainly learned a lot. I believe the second half is starting right now.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Please welcome to the stage MSNBC's Jacob Soboroff and 11 Madison Park's Daniel Humm.
Hey everybody, welcome to part 2. As the voice of God just told you, I'm Jacob Soboroff from NBC News and MSNBC. Daniel Humm is the founder and the owner and the chef of Make It Nice, the New York-based hospitality group behind the one and only 11 Madison Park. And before we get into our conversation, I want to tell them a little bit more about you. This guy earned his first Michelin star at what, 24 years old? 24 years old. They've received just about every award that you can get in the restaurant industry, including the #1 spot on the world's best restaurant list back in 2017. And he and I are going to talk about his vision for transitioning the very famous 11 Madison Park from a carnivorous restaurant to a plant-based, extremely high-end culinary experience, I think it's fair to say. And the reason that we want to have this conversation is that, as you heard about in the last session, ag accounts for 11% of all greenhouse gas emissions, agriculture. And there was a study back in 2018 that said 40,000 farms were studied. They produce 90% of the food eaten on the planet, and that we have to, it's not a choice, turn away from eating meat in the quantities that we do. And I want to touch on 3 different topics. One is the pandemic. 2 is the decision to switch to, you don't call it a vegan menu, but a plant-based menu. And then the legacy that you hope to leave and your reaction to criticism that you faced. You and I talked about this before the panel as well. So let's get started. Your backstory is amazing. You were a professional cyclist in Switzerland. You went out biking this morning. How'd you go from being a professional cyclist to one of the world's most famous chefs?
Well, thank you for having me. I was a professional cyclist. I left home really, really young to pursue that career. And I had a terrible accident when I was 23 years old. And that left me in a coma for 10 days. And that changed my life. At that moment, I was in the hospital remembering and thinking about my future within cycling, and I thought about how dangerous it is. And also during that time, there were a lot of other issues in the sports of cycling, and it was very, very competitive, and I felt that maybe I could never be the best in cycling because there was always others who were better. And being the best was somehow important to me. I don't know why, but that was. And I had this love for cooking, and my mom was an incredible cook, so I was always around food. I also left home early, as I said, so in the off season, at like 15 years old, the only job I could find to make a little bit of money was in the kitchen. So I was in the hospital at 23, and I thought, well, maybe I could be the best chef in the world. And I never looked back. And so I started in this profession very much with an athlete's mentality. I looked at what are the best restaurants, what are the best ingredients, what are the rankings, and I started making lists, and I'm like, okay, I started to study sort of like the rules of the game, if you would say. And then I started climbing this mountain, and over probably 20 years, I didn't really re-look at things, or I just was on this path. I was like, okay, 3 New York Times star, 4 New York Times star, 1 Michelin star, 2, 3, then the ranking of the number ones, all this stuff. And when I was 40, in 2017, our restaurant was named the best in the world. And I was deeply unhappy. It was kind of some of the darkest time in my life. I felt burned out. I felt I was pulled in so many different directions. I also felt that the time I could do no wrong in the media was also even the time I wasn't even in the kitchen that much. So the whole thing just felt like I arrived on the top of this mountain that was crumbling. And in a way, it was crumbling when I started going onto this path.
What was it? What was crumbling exactly?
I think it's the idea of what is fine dining, what is luxury.
And let's just be clear, at the time, what did an average meal cost at the restaurant, and were you making a profit? You must have been making a profit.
At the time, at 2017,
Yeah.
it was $335.
And you were annually making a profit.
Definitely. No, and you know, I think.
So I mean, to have $300 average meals and make a profit, probably a fortune, is not something that would send most chefs into a spiral. What happened?
It just was like, I felt I wasn't truthful. I felt that, well, first, the ingredients that we're celebrating, often in a fine dining restaurants, are not worth celebrating anymore. I felt what luxury is, our idea of luxury is broken. The food system is broken. And when you start having this kind of, when you do become a brand or a celebrity chef, you get to be pulled in so many different directions. And I was traveling the world to cook at this event in Peru, at this event in Brazil, in Asia, and I really lost the connection, the love for food.
But it wasn't until the pandemic that you decided to make this drastic change. Why did you wait, and what was it about the pandemic that, what it sounds like to me, is sort of forced you into making this decision?
I think the pandemic, I mean, it was really hard times for everyone, but looking back, for me, it was an incredible gift. You know, this isn't just an artistic endeavor, it is also our livelihood. My livelihood, it's, you know, we employ 300 people at the restaurant alone. So it's a lot of people rely on the restaurant being profitable.
You told me, I think, that there were over 250 employees and the restaurant closed for 17 months. And I can say, as a journalist, to see the impact of climate change on our everyday lives, it took a trip for me, many trips, frankly, from Greenland, north of the Arctic Circle, to Guatemala, and many places in between. What was it about the pandemic that let you shift your vantage point?
It was overnight. Like, our restaurant was open, I think it was March 16th, and we had a full dining room. The mayor announced that the city will close. It was unknown how long. That night, after a full service, we took our staff together and we said, okay, let's clean up. You know, we might see each other in 2 weeks again, 3 weeks again. That staff hasn't been together ever since, because we have so many people on visas from all over the world who, you know, people have changed their lives and also moved to different places. So that part was devastating, because a restaurant is only as good as its team. It's all about the teamwork, and we had a team that was working together for so long. So that was heartbreaking. And then quickly, like 2 weeks into it, it became clear that this pandemic would last a lot longer. I'm a co-founder of an organization called Rethinking. We used to take leftover food from our restaurant and others and produce meals for people in need. As soon as the pandemic started, restaurants shutting down, we didn't get food anymore from the restaurants, and food insecurity went from 1 million people in New York out of 8 to 2 million. It doubled. And the soup kitchens were shutting down because they're relying on volunteers who now didn't feel safe anymore to go to work. So I decided that I would turn 11 Madison Park into a community kitchen. And we started producing meals for our organization, Rethink Food. In those 16 months, we cooked over 1 million meals alone out of 11 Madison Park. So now I was in this neighborhood in so much of New York, like the Bronx, Queens, Long Island, huge parts of Brooklyn, that I never, and I felt guilty, that I never went to before. In fact, I only knew about 10% of New York. And the truth is that is the truth. And so I all of a sudden found this love for food again in a way I didn't have it for a long time.
Because why? You saw the people who were benefiting from your community kitchen come in? Was it about the workers that you knew no longer had a job? What was it? And then for me still, I don't see the connection between climate change and a plant-based menu and sort of this outreach that you had been doing. When did it click for you?
So I think it was more to the question of how the food, I connected with food in a new way. It was just so beautiful. Food is so beautiful. Food touches everyone. It doesn't matter how expensive a meal can be. If you put love into the preparation of food, it touches people. And that's a beautiful thing. And I felt like I lost that connection when the restaurant became so well known and so.
Did you decide before you reopened? First of all, how'd you reopen? Did you take a PPP loan? Is that, or did you get? I mean, restaurants were hemorrhaging money. How were you able to reopen a restaurant that I'm sure had an incredible amount of overhead?
During the pandemic, early on, I didn't know if it was ever going to be possible to reopen the restaurant. We were facing bankruptcy. Like many other restaurants, our rent is almost $5 million a year. So when you're closed for 16 months, there's no way you can pay for that. It was only a few months later when the landlord said, and in fact, in my head, I was so happy cooking these meals, and I thought, well, maybe that is just the next chapter. Maybe I'm gonna figure out to evolve in this way and using food as doing good and giving back. I also struggled, and it's a continuous struggle, and your question, and journalists love to ask that question about the price of $335. It is expensive, and it is something that I do struggle with as well. that it isn't accessible for everyone. But then on the other hand, I also believe in creating beauty and magic on a high level with high quality ingredients in a beautiful place with a team next to me that is excellent and all that. And so I think during the pandemic, it became clear when the landlord said, we're going to support you and you're going to reopen.
Forgive your rent?
Forgive me the rent completely, which without that, we would never open again. Then I all of a sudden saw this sort of opportunity that maybe we can do both. Maybe we can create beauty, create, you know, these magical experiences that every night people come and there's every night a table they will never forget that meal for the rest of their lives. And that's beautiful.
I'm sure you remember the day you either decided to reopen or reopen. What was that day?
It wasn't like that. When I got that call from the landlord, I was more like, okay, I appreciate it, and let me give it some thought.
And when you reopened, did you reopen with this new plant-based menu?
Yeah.
So you opened, May 2020, I think, was the time you announced the plant-based menu. How did people react?
Well, it was world news. But I wasn't prepared for this.
What did the headlines say? They said, one of the world's most famous chefs at one of the most celebrated restaurants has reopened, has emerged from the pandemic, and decided to throw away the entire menu that got you to this place. Stressful?
Unexpected. I thought so much about my opportunity that I had with 11 Madison Park and the voice that I had created for myself and the responsibility I have to use it. I thought that this restaurant, we can really change the world in a way. I thought about the car industry a lot, and I thought about Toyota Prius when they started their hybrid car almost 25 years ago, which was groundbreaking and incredible. But it didn't really change the world quickly. It wasn't like a sexy car. It was, it was for people who were really committed on this topic. And then when Tesla started making a car that's just a luxury car, that's a great car that happens to be electric, and I saw the power that had, and it changed completely the world. For me, it was about luxury too. It was about the ideas that, and I'm guilty of it myself. We celebrated ingredients way too long. They no longer deserve to be celebrated.
You're talking about meat?
Meat, caviar, certain fish.
You told me something on the phone about caviar that I didn't know.
So caviar, there is nothing luxurious about caviar today.
So I've just been hosed every time I order caviar.
We all are. And it,
Not that I'm ordering caviar with any regularity, but.
No, but it is 100% false. It's 100% inaccurate today.
Not rare?
It is not rare.
Uh-huh. Well, that sucks.
In fact, you go to JFK Airport, there's a caviar bar. It's not rare. It doesn't taste good. It's not wild like it once was at some point, and you can argue if you believed in that. But at some point, it was something very unique.
And same can be said for meat, in your opinion?
Yeah, 100%. Like, I tell you something, like, our restaurant, in a grand scheme of things, is a small restaurant. We only serve 90 to 100 guests a night. And for the main course, when you come eat at a restaurant, you don't make a choice, you just sit down and it's sort of like a Broadway show. For the main course...
It's a prefix, as they say.
Yes. For the main course, you have duck. We had a world-famous duck. that everyone knew, and then we had beef. You could make one choice of the main course.
And this is crazy. I want to make sure to have time for questions, and I have a couple of things I want to ask you, but how many ducks did you serve a year?
That's where I'm getting to. We served 25,000, our restaurant used 25,000 ducks a year.
25,000 ducks.
And 4,000 cows.
So these aren't coming from a small farm.
We're a small, high-end restaurant who would pay any price for it to come from a small farm. There is no small farm that creates 25,000 bucks. It's an illusion.
So when you go to a fancy restaurant, sorry for interrupting you, and they tell you this is farm to table, every ingredient here comes from a local producer, we go out and we find it ourselves, is it true?
My place is not to talk about other restaurants, but
Let's talk about yours. At the time, would you have been able to say that and it be accurate?
we did say that about our duck.
And it wasn't accurate, that it was a small...
It wasn't a small farm. Yeah, I think we were all guilty. I feel extremely guilty that we would turn, the caviar, for example, we would celebrate caviar to the end of the day. And at some point, and this was before the pandemic, we had this beautiful dish of peas and caviar, and the peas were so delicious that we actually decided not to use the caviar. And I had this conversation with my chefs. I'm like, does anyone here know where this is from? And we all didn't know. And yeah, there is something broken. It is like what Michael Pollan, was what Michael Pollan, pointed out maybe 10 or 15 years ago about all the products in the supermarkets where, they all have a picture of the beautiful, idyllic farm.
It's greenwashing.
It's
A couple things. One is, what are people going to find on the menu today? What's your favorite dish? I'll make it easy for you.
I can't tell you that because it's been so beautiful to work with vegetables. And it's like this journey that we take you on. We started a farm upstate. Vegetables are... What was also hard was to convince my entire team to go into this direction. No one believed that this would work. And for some of the chefs, it was hard to leave some of our skills behind. We perfected how to make that skin crispy on the duck and how to make that foie gras perfect and how to butter poach that lobster. We spent our lives perfecting that. So now saying we're going to go all plant-based, and we're using the word plant-based
Instead of vegan.
Instead of vegan, because I think the word vegan, in my opinion, is quite limiting. And it's not a word of it's of expansive thinking. It feels quite restrictive. Cooking with vegetables has been the opposite of being restrictive. Like right now, any vegetable could be the main course. The options are in the thousands. Before you have like 5 different meats, and then there's a few different cuts and a few different preparations. So,
one of the things that struck me when we talked is that you said a couple things. Well, first, are you profitable today? Have you been able to become profitable again with this new menu?
We are definitely profitable, but the pandemic, coming out of the pandemic has been definitely a massive challenge for any business, anyone who is running a business with the supply chain, the gas prices, the labor.
Let's talk about that. One of the things that you had said to me when we spoke on the phone was, I wrote it down because I thought it was actually so interesting. You said, the plant-based menu has been extremely controversial. It hit a nerve that was quite one that I wasn't prepared for. It came from a creative place. And you said, I think we should celebrate change, but not criticize people about them. But you've not been immune to criticism. The New York Times gave you a bad review about the plant-based menu. You've had former employees speak out about food waste and about a plan that you had in place to increase the wage of the workers that ultimately didn't come to fruition. This has been a challenge for you. Do you want to respond to any of that?
I don't even know what to respond to, but
We ought to give you one by one. There's a journalist at Business Insider, Kate Taylor, who said that a lot of the vegetables early on in this process ultimately were wasted, were thrown away. Is that true? And how come? What happened?
I mean, I don't even know how to get onto your level right now. Like, it is so, this has been said in an article, I actually never read the article. But I think what's clear is that people are really afraid of change. And I think for us to, like for anyone who knows me, to think that I would throw away food, it's just absurd. But I think people are really challenged by this idea that, and by the way, we didn't change our pricing. In fact, it's the same pricing as before, and in fact, it's more expensive to create these meals with only vegetables. But I think what it's speaking up about a system that is broken. It's speaking up about the meat industry. It's speaking up about other restaurants. It's speaking up about people who review our restaurants. And I think people have a really hard time to wrap their head around seeing this succeeding.
I ask not to put you on the spot, but because obviously there's challenges associated with making this pivot that you've made. And in the article today from Business Insider, it says that you had written an op-ed with a journalist about raising the wages of your employees. And ultimately, you didn't go through with that wage increase. Is that true? And if so, why? What's the reasoning that wasn't able to happen once you decided on this new menu?
One thing, as being competitive the way we are, I think we always want to be leading in some ways. And a year ago, our industry has been underpaid forever to extremes. And I think none of us who are, me in particular, never was proud of the fact that the way these laws were made. But we had the idea of really we did an exercise where we said, okay, let's write this piece and see how it's going to feel. But what if we would raise prices by 40%? Like the same way I believed, 11 Madison Park wasn't selling ingredients on a plate, and therefore I believed that we could go all plant-based because people paid a price to have an experience.
And so did you decide to not increase prices, which meant you didn't increase wages as well?
When we did the exercise, and this is not just a creative endeavor, it's also running a business in a very tough environment, and that is our livelihood. We didn't feel comfortable charging $480 for the meal to do this price increase, so we decided that we would move up there slower. And in fact, in this letter that was never published, that was our letter internally, we wanted to pay people, I believe, $20. Right. Today, we're paying $17, $18.
So you are, in fact, moving in that direction.
100%. We're always trying to figure out, you cannot get people to do the work that is required at 11 Madison Park if you don't have a great culture and if you don't treat them well.
Let's get some questions in from everybody else, and I appreciate you answering these questions because they're tough that I think a lot of restaurateurs face, and it's no secret that it can get hairy in the kitchen, and that it's not an easy environment to work in. Any questions here? Let's get you a microphone. What's your name?
Kaya.
Hi, Kai.
Hi, thank you. When you were switching over to a plant-based menu, did you have to challenge at all your own relationship with meat and your own assumptions about meat from growing up eating it and cooking it yourself?
That's a really good question. So for me, anyone who is paying attention to what's actually happening with our food system, and you don't need to be an expert, you learn pretty quickly that things have to change, and we have to change with it. And for me, I felt I had this creative platform to, if this is where we're going, we might as well make it as delicious and magical as possible. And so it came from a really creative place, became very political. It became much more about climate change. I experienced ingredients disappear in the 30 years since I've been cooking, so I wanted to respond to this. But my personal diet has always been plant forward my whole life, but I was no vegan by no means. And I am getting pretty close to it, but I'm still not 100%. But I had 3 days ago, and I always used to love sushi. And it was sort of like one of the guilty pleasures. And the other day I had an experience at a sushi restaurant, and afterwards I didn't feel good about it. And I actually didn't feel, not even philosophically, I actually didn't feel good physically. And we will experience in our lifetime where there's hundreds and hundreds of sushi restaurants in New York, in LA, in all the major cities. We will experience in our lifetime where they will not have fish, and it will change.
I want to get one more question in, but I also wonder, where are you at now? You were in a place in 2017 where you were at the top of your game. You weren't satisfied. You decided to make this drastic change, and it certainly was a drastic one. How do you feel now about the work that you're doing?
I feel so happy. I know that we're on the right side of history, and you can like it or you can hate it, but the fact is everyone is talking about it, and so that makes me really proud. And I know this is making a change, and so I never thought that I would have the opportunity to do something for the very first time, like there has never been in the history of the Michelin Guide. That's like, the guide that's been ranking restaurants for 140 years or something like that. In its whole history, there has never been a restaurant on this level who has gone down this path. So it's pretty incredible and exciting. And the narrative of the media, of some of the media is one, but the proof is really in the restaurant, where every night the restaurant is full.
You told me about a cattle rancher who came in and said that he had the meal of his life.
Yeah, it was a cattle rancher from Texas who wrote me this, this letter and said, basically, thank you for changing my life. This is making a big change. Our guests are also much younger and much more diverse. The energy in the room is also different because as you're eating vegetables, you're actually getting more excited as the night goes on, and you're not crashing after you had the main course.
Another question? Here we go.
Hi. Before you came on, we heard from some folks who are doing innovative things and creating sustainable protein sources going forward. Just curious how you think about those new innovative protein products in your restaurant and the industry as a whole going forward.
And let me be more pointed. Would you put a Beyond Burger or an Impossible Burger on the menu there?
No, I wouldn't.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I've spent a whole life on finding quality and whole ingredients. And I think that all the innovation that's going towards solving this problem is amazing and so necessary. but I think it's important that chefs are also waking up to trying to solve this problem. So it is not only solved by the Silicon Valley money and by scientists, because I think I don't want fake chicken. I don't want fake this or fake that. I want real food. I want whole food. I don't want to drink not milk. You know? So I think it's really important. I think, you know, if for example, and I've done a lot of work, as I said, with food insecurity. McDonald's feeds more food insecure Americans than anyone else, and you know, that burger, it's questionable if it is meat or what kind of meat, and if the Beyond.
You really believe that? You're not sure that it's actually meat at McDonald's?
I mean, there's portions of meat in there for sure, but that's not the meat we should be eating. It's actually making us sick. And it's also making our planet sick. So if any of those products can be a bridge to have people having these options, eating a hamburger of Beyond Meat, if that's better, you know, for the environment, then I think that's a great thing.
We have 40 seconds left, but we'll do a quick one if you can make it quick. Microphone coming to you right now.
Thank you so much for all you're doing for so
Thank
many.
you.
I've eaten at 11 Madison Park before it was vegan or vegetarian, and I can't wait to come back. I just wanted to say thank you.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you, and I really appreciate you being so open about this journey. It's one that very clearly is groundbreaking, and not without its challenges, and your candor is very much appreciated. Thanks for being here.
Thank
It's all
you.
with you.